The wind was already up when the stage rolled in, a dry, moaning thing that dragged dust across the main road like a funeral veil. The horses fought the bit, eyes rolling white, while the driver wrestled them down in front of the post office. The crowd that had gathered there, a few men from the saloon, the blacksmith, the boy who swept the boardwalk, leaned forward as though watching the arrival of judgment itself. Elias McCord stood at the edge of that dust storm, hat brim low, boots sunk in the powder. The wind pulled at his coat, his jaw tight as the coach door swung open with a groan. He'd been waiting 3 months. 3 months since that last letter, the one sealed with K-full hand, signed Clara Whitfield. The words had been soft as linen, full of promise and faith. A good woman, he'd thought, a new beginning. But the woman who stepped down from the coach wasn't the one he'd pictured. Black dress, black gloves, a widow's veil, long enough to brush her shoulders. She carried no smile, only a small leather case and a face pale from travel. The driver handed down her bag, muttering something about a rough road and worse weather. She turned her eyes to Elias. "You're Elias McCord." Her voice was low, steady, touched with a rasp of dust and grief. He nodded once. She didn't curtsy, didn't reach for his hand, only said, "I'm May, Clara's sister." The wind howled down the street like it had heard a lie. For a heartbeat, Elias didn't move, didn't breathe. Around them, Dusthaven waited. The blacksmith's hammer still midday, the saloon doors creaking soft. "My sister's gone," May said finally. "Fever took her. She made me promise that I'd come in her place." The words struck clean through him, sharp as a knife under the ribs. He stepped forward, slow. "You came." "In her place," she said again, eyes narrowing, daring him to argue. Behind them, the driver cracked his reins and rolled away, the coach fading into the storm. They rode out to the ranch in silence. The sun bled low behind the ridges, painting the desert in iron and fire. Every hoofbeat sounded like a clock counting down. Elias's ranch sat at the mouth of a canyon, half built from old lumber and half from stones scavenged off the ridge. He'd raised it himself after he'd buried his guns. When they reached the gate, May dismounted first. Her movements were practiced, not the clumsy kind of a woman unused to horses. She tied the reins tight, looked around. The corrals, the half-broken windmill, the well with its rope frayed near the bucket. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "For how long?" "Long enough." She didn't ask more. Didn't need to. "Inside." He lit a lamp. The glass chimney flickered, throwing yellow light across the table and the rifle that leaned against the wall. The place was clean, sparse, the home of a man who owned more regrets than furniture. May set her case down. The sound of its latch clicking open was louder than thunder. Inside were folded clothes, a worn Bible, and a small portrait wrapped in cloth. She touched it once, gentle as a prayer, then closed the lid. "Clara wrote about this place," she said quietly. "Said it was peaceful. Said you wanted to make something honest out here." "I did," Elias said. "Did you?" He met her eyes. They were gray as the ash at the bottom of a fire. "I'm trying," he said. Night fell without ceremony. Coyotes called from the ridge. The wind shifted colder. Elias poured coffee for them both, the pot blackened with years of use. May sipped without comment. Her gloves laid neatly beside her cup. "Wasn't expecting a widow," he said finally. "Wasn't expecting to be one," she answered. That silenced him. Outside, something creaked, the barn door. He rose, hand brushing the rifle. "It's the wind," she said, calm as still water. He waited, listening. It was a wind, but it carried something else too, a rhythm, like a footstep dragging through grit. Elias opened the door, scanning the dark. The lamp's glow stretched just far enough to catch movement, a scrap of paper caught on the fence. He walked to it, tore it loose. A half-torn wanted poster. The name was faded, but his eyes found it easily. Elias M.C. Cord, wanted dead or alive. The old life had a way of riding back in when you least expected it. When he came inside, May was standing, her eyes fixed on him. "Something wrong." "Old ghost," he muttered. He crushed the paper in his hand and dropped it into the fire. She didn't ask whose name had been on it. Didn't need to. Later, when she took the small back room meant for her sister, Elias sat by the dying fire, staring at the last curls of smoke rising from the poster. Outside, the desert whispered 1,000 small sounds that could have been wind or memory. From down the hall, he heard the faint creak of a bed frame, the rustle of skirts. Then her voice, low and steady through the half-open door. She wrote to you every week. Said you were kind. Said she wanted to build something here. I read those letters to her when she got sick. He turned his head. She stood in the doorway now, the lamplight catching the edge of her veil. I thought maybe if I came, she said, it wouldn't all be for nothing. Elias's throat felt dry as sand. You don't owe me that. Maybe not. She looked past him, toward the fire. But I owe her. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere far off a horse snorted in its stall. Finally she said, almost herself, you should know, I'm not her. I'm not gentle, or patient, or easy to forgive. He studied her face, the hard lines, the sadness sitting behind them. Neither am I, he said. Something flickered between them, not warmth exactly, but recognition. Two scars seeing each other for what they were. When the lamp went out, Elias stepped onto the porch. The moon hung low, thin and pale, over the empty land. Coyotes were still calling, long and mournful. He looked toward the horizon, east where the coach had vanished. The wind tugged at his coat again, and he could almost hear the old folks whispering from town. The rancher sent for a bride, but her sister came in her place. He thought about the way she'd stepped off that stage, the steadiness in her eyes. Thought about the letter she carried in her pocket, folded neat and worn soft at the creases. Somewhere out in that dark, the ghost of his past shifted, restless. And inside, behind the thin wall, the widow who wasn't meant to be their breed evenly in her sleep, like the first calm before a storm neither of them yet saw coming. The wind moved through the canyon again, whistling over the stones. It sounded almost like laughter. By dawn, the wind had died. What was left behind was silence, the kind that pressed close, heavy as judgment. Elias was already outside when the first light broke over the ridge. He moved slow through the yard, checking the fences, the troughs, the horses. Habit more than need. The world always felt less likely to come apart when his hands were busy. From the barn door came the sound of boots. May stepped out, sleeves rolled high, hair tied back. She had traded her morning dress for a plain cotton shirt and a man's vest. The black veil was gone. Her eyes were clearer now, but there was something in them that didn't match the rest of her, like a soldier who'd forgotten how to rest. You been up long? She asked. Didn't sleep much. Neither did I. She took a pitchfork from the wall and started spreading hay without asking where it went. Elias watched her wake, not because she needed direction, but because she moved like someone who'd done this before. Or something harder. You handle a ranch? He asked. Handled worse. That ended the talk. By midday, the heat was a living thing. The air shimmered off the ground, the sky white as bleached bone. Elias hammered a new hinge on the corral gate. May led the horses down to water. She carried herself with a quiet purpose that didn't invite kindness. When they finally paused for shade, he passed to the canteen. She drank deep, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then nodded toward the ridge. What's past that canyon? Open desert. Nothing you'd want. Nothing's what most people are after out here, she said. He studied her a moment. You're not most people. She smiled, but only halfway. Neither are you. That night, they ate by lamplight, beans, bread, coffee strong enough to blister. May sat near the window, watching the last of the sun burn out behind the hills. Town's been quiet lately, Elias said. Too quiet. May didn't look at him. You mean the Dagger boys? He stiffened. Who told you that? Driver mentioned it on the road. Said they'd been taking stock from every ranch between here and Red Mesa. She set her cup down. You had trouble with him before. No, he hesitated. Not yet. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. Then you will. The way she said it made him feel cold. A week passed. Routine took hold. But something in the air was shifting. The nights grew darker, the dogs restless. Once, Elias found tracks by the far fence, not hoof prints, but boots. Fresh. Too fresh. He didn't tell her. Still, May seemed to know. She cleaned the rifle one morning without a word, stripped it down and reassembled it with practiced ease. When he stepped into the room, she didn't flinch or hide it. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "My husband taught me," she said, "before he died." She didn't meet his eyes when she said it. "He was killed by outlaws," she added after a pause. "Men with knives cut into their boots. That's why they called them the Dagger Boys." Elias froze. "Your husband?" "They left him in a ditch outside Jefferson City." Her voice didn't break. "I followed their trail west. Didn't find them. Yet." She looked up then, her face hard in the half-light. "You think I came here by chance?" He didn't answer. That evening, a storm gathered low over the mesa. No rain, just thunder crawling across the sky. Elias sat on the porch, oiling his revolver. He hadn't touched it in years. The metal still held the heat of memory. May joined him, a shawl around her shoulders. She stared out into the distance, where lightning cracked white against the hills. "You knew men like them once," she said. "Didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "Before the ranch. Before I buried that life." "What did they call you?" He hesitated. "The Coyote." She smiled faintly. "Fitting." He met her gaze. "That name's dead. Names don't die easy out here." The thunder rolled again, long and low. The attack came 2 nights later. It started with the horses screaming. Elias was on his feet before the first gunshot tore the air. May was already by the door, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. 3 shadows moved near the barn, men on foot, faces masked with rags. One fired again, the bullet splintering the post beside the porch. May didn't wait for orders. She dropped to one knee, sighted clean, and fired twice. Both shots cracked hard and true. One man fell screaming. The other vanished into the dark. Elias's blood surged, the old rhythm flooding back. He grabbed his revolver, dashed to the corral. The last intruder was cutting the fence, but Elias's voice cut sharper. "Drop it." The man spun and froze. Even in the dark, he recognized a face. "Coyote," he spat. "Didn't figure you'd still be breathing." Elias's finger twitched on the trigger. "You got bad information." The man laughed, then lunged for his gun. Elias shot him clean through the chest. The sound echoed down the valley like thunder answering thunder. Silence followed, heavy and final. By dawn, the bodies were gone, buried shallow under the cottonwoods. Elias hadn't asked for help, but May had been there anyway, sleeves rolled, hands steady. She didn't look away, not even once. "You killed before," he said quietly, as the last shovel of dirt fell. She wiped her brow, once or twice. "Didn't look like your first time." "It wasn't." He stared at her then, really stared. "You came for them, didn't you? For the Dagger Boys." She didn't deny it. "I came for what's owed." "And now you found it." "Not yet," she said. "That was only the beginning." That night, the fire burned low in the hearth. Elias sat across from her, the revolver lying between them on the table like an unspoken truth. "I can't go back to that life," he said. "I'm not asking you to. But you'll draw them here. They're coming anyway." She looked up, her eyes fierce and shining in the lamplight. Might as well meet them where there's someone who knows how to fight. For a moment, neither spoke. The lamp hissed softly. Outside, the coyotes called again, closer this time. Finally, Elias reached out and turned the revolver toward her. "You shoot better than I do," he said. May's smile was thin, almost tender. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me." She stood, took the weapon, and walked to the door. The wind was rising again, rattling the shutters. Over her shoulder, she said, "Maybe the world needs one more coyote after all." Elias didn't answer. He just watched her disappear into the dark, the shape of her moving like a shadow carved from the storm. And when the storyteller's voice comes, low and cracked with age. It always ends at part the same way. That was the night the ranch on the ridge stopped being quiet. The night the widow showed her teeth. And the coyote remembered his. The heat came early that morning, a dry, punishing kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer like the world was burning from the edges inward. Dusthaven lay still under it, shutters drawn, horses lathered in sweat. Even the wind had given up. Elias and May rode into town without a word between them. The air carried the smell of gun oil and tension. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Men on porches stopped talking when they passed. The saloon doors swung slow, the piano inside gone silent. Old Sheriff Julian stood by his office with a rag and a bottle, pretending to clean his badge. His hands shook. Elias hitched his horse outside the feed store. May dismounted beside him, rifle slung across her back. Her black gloves were gone, and the sun caught the pale scar along her wrist. "Boone Keller's in town," Julian called out without meeting their eyes. Came in with 4 of the Dagger boys. Drunk, mean, and looking for someone. Elias's jaw hardened. "Let me guess who." The sheriff spat. Said he heard the coyote was still breathing. Wants to see if the legend's got any bullets left in him. May's voice was flat. "Then is here for both of us." The saloon stank of whiskey, smoke, and sweat. Boone Keller sat at the center table, boots on a chair, spades glinting in the lamplight. He was built broad through the shoulders, his face cut by a long scar that made his grin look like a wound. Around him lounged the Dagger boys, for men with pistols easy at hand and eyes mean as rattlers. When Elias stepped through the doors, the piano man stopped playing. "Well, hellfire," Boone drawled, pushing back his hat, "if it ain't the ghost himself." Elias stood in the doorway, shadow long across the floorboards. "You shouldn't have come." Boone laughed, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. "You buried my cousin outside Laredo. Thought I'd pay respects." He tipped his glass. "Sides, I've been hearing stories. Man gives up his guns, sends for a bride. Turns out has gone soft." May stepped in behind Elias. Boone's smile froze for half a breath. "Who's this?" "My wife," Elias said. Boone's eyes glinted. "Pretty thing. Shame she's got your luck." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sound of boots shifting, the creak of leather. Then May spoke, calm as Sunday morning. "I remember you," she said. "Missouri. You were there when they cut my husband down." Boone blinked, and for a heartbeat he looked uncertain. Then his grin widened again, slow and cruel. "Small world." The first gun went off before anyone saw who drew. Elias dropped behind the bar as a bottle shattered above him. May moved like lightning, firing once, twice, 2 Dagger boys down before the smoke had settled. Boone's men roared, overturning tables. Glass exploded, wood splintered. The room filled with a hot reek of gunpowder. Elias rose, firing from the hip. Another outlaw fell, clutching his chest. Boone ducked behind a pillar, shouting curses. May reloaded without looking, movement sharp and practiced. A bullet tore through her sleeve, grazing her arm, but she didn't flinch. Outside, people scattered into alleys and doorways. The town held its breath. Then, silence. Smoke curled through the air, sweet and bitter. 2 bodies lay motionless. The others were gone. May stepped over the debris, eyes scanning. "He ran." Elias nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "He'll be back. He'll bring more." He looked around at the wreck saloon, the sheriff creeping out from behind the post. "Then we make ready." They rode back to the ranch by starlight. Neither spoke. The desert stretched wide and empty, the kind of darkness that made a man feel the size of his sins. When they reached the gate, Elias dismounted and went straight to the shed. The floorboards had hid an old trunk, nailed shut, dust thick on the lid. He pried it open. Inside lay his past, twin Colt revolvers, black leather holsters, a belt of worn cartridges, and a duster long faded to gray. May stood in the doorway, watching. "Guess the coyote's not dead after all," she said softly. He met her eyes. Wasn't planning to bring him back. Sometimes you don't get to choose. The next morning, the town was empty but for the brave and the doomed. The Dagger Boys were coming. Everyone knew it. The preacher locked the church. The blacksmith boarded his windows, and Sheriff Julian packed his bags before dawn. Elias and May waited at the ranch. She cleaned her rifle one last time. He checked the pistols, laid them across the table, and loaded each round slow and careful, like a prayer. "You don't have to stay," he said. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You think I've come this far to run?" He studied her face, the strength there, the shadows under her eyes. "I just don't want to bury another woman." "Then don't, miss," she said. The Dagger Boys came with the sun. 6 riders now, Boone at their head, dust rising behind them like smoke from hell's own fire. Elias stepped out onto the porch, coat long, hat low. May stood beside him, rifle brace against the post. Boone reined in 10 paces from the gate. "Well now," he called, "look at the happy couple." Elias said nothing. "Tell you what, Coyote, hand me the deed, and I'll let you live long enough to bury her proper." May's rifle cracked before he finished. The bullet grazed Boone's cheek, carving a clean line through his grin. Chaos followed. Gunfire roared across the yard. Bullets ripped through wood, splintered the fence. Elias fired back, precise, deadly. 2 riders went down. May dropped another before a round slammed into the post beside her, showering splinters across her face. Boone charged forward, revolvers blazing. Elias dove, rolled, came up firing, 1 shot, then another. The last man fell screaming into the dust. Boone hit the ground running, knife flashing in his hand. Elias met him head-on. They crashed together, blades scraping, fists landing like hammers. "You can't bury what you were." Boone spat. Elias slammed him into the date, teeth bared. "Watch me." The knife slashed, caught Elias across the ribs. Pain flared, hot and sharp. He staggered, gun half-raised, and then May's voice cut through the smoke. "Elias, down!" He dropped just as her rifle thundered. Boone froze mid-step, eyes wide. Then he fell forward, knife still clutched, dust billowing around him. Silence came again, sudden, final. When it was done, the air smelled of blood and gunpowder. The ranch was pocked with bullet holes, the ground littered with shells. Elias leaned against the post, hand pressed to his side. May walked to Boone's body. She looked down at him for a long moment, then kicked the knife from his hand. "That's for Missouri," she said quietly. Elias watched her, the way she stood tall, unflinching, breath coming hard but steady. "You could have killed him from the start," he said. "I needed him to know who did it." She turned toward him then, eyes bright with something fierce and exhausted. He nodded slowly. "You've got a mean streak." She gave him a half-smile. "Takes one to see one." They both laughed, low and broken, as the wind picked up again and carried the dust away. And when the storyteller reaches this part, his voice always drops to a whisper, like as afraid the desert might be listening. That day, the Dagger Boys met their end in Dusthaven. But what rose from that blood wasn't just vengeance. It was legend, the widow who shot straight to sin, and the coyote who ran out of places to hide. The sun came up red over Dusthaven, the kind of red that stained the world and didn't wash out. The smoke from the gunfight still hung low, twisting lazy through the canyon like a ghost that hadn't yet decided to leave. The town was quiet again, too quiet, but the quiet this time wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Elias sat on the porch, one hand wrapped around a bandage rib, the other gripping a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. His coat was torn, his face cut. The revolvers lay across his knees like tired dogs. He hadn't slept. May moved slow around the yard, dragging what was left of the Dagger Boys into a shallow trench by the cottonwoods. Her hands were blistered, her shirt stiff with blood. She worked without a word, same as she'd done since dawn. When the last shovel hit date, she stood still for a long moment, staring at the mound. "Boone's not here," she said. Elias lifted his head. "What?" She turned, eyes hard and certain. "His body's gone." He was on his feet before the words finished leaving her mouth. Out beyond the fence, fresh drag marks cut through the dust. One body, hauled west toward the canyon. "Guess he wasn't finished," Elias muttered. May's hand went to her rifle. "Then neither am I." They rode without speaking. The trail wound between sandstone cliffs, narrow enough that the horses had to pick their way slow. The sun climbed higher, the heat closing around them like a fist. When they reached the canyon mouth, the track split, one set veering toward a ridge where the rock gleamed sharp and white. Elias dismounted, his heading for the old mine. May nodded, eyes scanning the shadows. Then that's where this ends. He caught her wrist before she could move. You don't have to do this alone. She looked at him, and for the first time, her face softened. I've been alone a long time, Elias. So have I. The way they looked at each other then, quiet, knowing it wasn't tenderness. It was understanding, carved deep by loss and fire. Then she pulled her hand free, and they moved together toward the ridge. They found Boone at the edge of the mine, slumped against a boulder, blood dark on his side but his gun still in hand. When he saw them, he laughed, a dry, ugly sound that echoed through the rocks. Well, look at that, the bride and the beast. Elias raised his pistol. You should have stayed dead. Boone grinned, teeth red. Can't kill a ghost, coyote. You ought to know that. May stepped forward, rifle steady. I ain't after ghosts. Boone's arm snapped up. The shot hit her shoulder, spun her back hard into the dirt. Elias fired twice. Boone dropped for good this time, his gun clattering across the stone. Elias was beside her in seconds, pressing a hand to the wound. Blood soaked through fast, too fast. Stay still, he said. She coughed, smiled weakly. Guess that's harder than it sounds. He tore a strip from his coat, tied it tight around her arm. The sun was a white blaze above them, the wind full of heat and dust. You'll be all right, he said, and for the first time since he buried his name, Elias McCord prayed like he meant it. He carried her back to the horses. She didn't speak, but her hand found his once, just a touch light as breath. When they reached the ranch, the world had turned gold with the setting sun. He laid her on the bed, fetched water, cleaned the wound. The bullet had gone clean through. She'd live. When her eyes opened, he was sitting beside her, hat off, staring at the floor. Still here, she whispered. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. A small smile touched her lips. You did all right for a man who swore he was done fighting. He looked at her, voice rough. You did all right for a woman who wasn't supposed to be here. For a while, neither spoke. The cicadas outside buzzed low and steady, and the sky turned the color of cooled ash. Then May said, There's something you ought to know. He waited. She reached for the leather case at her bedside, the one she'd carried off that stagecoach. From it, she pulled a folded paper, old and yellowed. She handed it to him. It was a letter, the last of Clara Whitfield's. Elias unfolded it slow, reading the first lines. His brow furrowed. If you ever meet my sister, forgive her, he read aloud. She carries more ghosts than I can count. May's eyes were fixed on the firelight. I wrote those words, she said quietly. Clara died the winter before I ever left Missouri. Fever took her early. I thought if I came under her name, folks might treat me like someone worth believing in. I figured you would too. Elias didn't move, didn't speak. Finally, she said, You sent for a bride, Elias. What you got was me, a liar, a widow, and a fool who thought she could outrun her past. The fire popped, and he looked up. You think I'm any different? She frowned. He leaned back in his chair, weary smile cutting through the dust on his face. I killed men for money, wore a name that scared mothers into locking their doors. You think I deserved a woman from those letters? You think she'd have stayed if she'd seen who I was? May blinked hard, and for the first time, her eyes shone wet in the lamplight. Maybe we both sent for the wrong people, she whispered. Or maybe, Elias said, we just ended up where we were meant to. Weeks passed. The wound healed. The ranch took on a strange kind of quiet. Not peace, but something near it. Elias rebuilt the fence. May planted wild sage by the porch. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. They didn't need to. One evening, as the sun died red over the mesa, she stood beside him on the ridge. The desert stretched endless, glowing gold under the last light. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He shook his head. This is where the ghosts rest." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay a while." The wind picked up, warm and soft, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, long, low, mournful. Elias looked toward the sound. "They still talk about the coyote and the widow, you think." May's voice was quiet. "If they do, they'll get it wrong." "Good," he said. "That's how legends live." She looked at him then, and for a moment the world felt still, the dust, the wind, the ghosts. The storyteller's voice always ended the same way, over a crackling fire, with a tone like a prayer whispered to the desert. They say when the moon turns red over Dusthaven, you can still see them riding out past the canyon. The widow in black, the coyote in gray, two souls who found each other where bullets and mercy meet. He sent for a bride, but what he got was a legend.